About a year ago, I made a video about my favorite character in Game of Thrones, Theon Greyjoy. But now that the show's finale has come and gone, and we've seen the conclusion to Theon's character arc, I would like to revisit the arc as a whole. You should watch my first video on Theon if you haven't already, but the basic premise is that Theon's struggle with identity is unbelievably compelling, even though he commits many terrible acts. What made his character so interesting is that he never felt like a villain or an anti-hero, just a person trying to do the right thing in a cruel world. But admittedly, there were some important aspects to Theon as a character that I left out of that video. I failed to really dive into Reek and why Reek is so important for his character and how the audience identifies with him. That past video only scratched the surface because I left out a lot of details. So let's go back and see why I loved Theon so much in the first place, and explore why I think Season 8 gave him an incredible ending. Theon starts the show as a hostage held up north in Winterfell. Many years prior, Theon's father, the King of the Iron Islands, rebelled against the throne and was taken down rather easily. So the Starks of Winterfell took Theon, the only living male heir to the Salt Throne, to be Ned Stark's ward. Theon was 8 years old when this happened, and at an age like that, it would have been terrifying for anyone to be held captive. However, Theon is treated about as well as he possibly could have been, being embraced as a Stark by Ned and his children. At the beginning of the show, we see Theon try and embrace the fact that he has been raised as a Stark, but ultimately the ways of the Ironborn conflict with the Stark's way of life. Thus, Theon is forced to make a choice between two sides of himself for practically every decision he has for the rest of the show. This creates a constant inner conflict, asking, who is Theon Greyjoy? This fundamental conflict from episode 1 within Theon is a perfect setup for his character in the rest of the show and the beginning of his amazing character progression. To be fair, having a character be focused so heavily on identity has been done before, but what makes it so unique in this case is the medieval setting. So often, medieval stories are solely focused on the meaning of honor and aspects of humanity that apply to everyone in a very broad sense, but no direct correlation to the times we currently live in. For example, back in medieval times, you weren't able to choose your profession. You just did what your father did. In theory, this should take away the pressure and fear of failing to choose what you will grow up to be, which is so prominent in our culture today. However, Game of Thrones does have a lot of characters who have climbed higher up the ladder than they were supposed to at birth. Characters like Littlefinger, Varys, Robert Baratheon, and even Jon Snow. The ability for Game of Thrones to replicate our day-to-day modern struggles is one of the biggest reasons the world of Westeros is so compelling to a widespread audience. And in the case of Theon, it almost feels as if George R.R. Martin is exploring a direct feeling that so many young people experience today. It applies to all of the kids who leave school and are faced with choosing a career path, but have so many voices telling them what's right and what's best for them. This usually accumulates into anxiety over what choices to make in the future, a form of anxiety that can be very hard to overcome. Theon perfectly captures the constant anxiety and pressure of wanting to choose the right path. In the show, Theon's choice to betray Robb, which led to his capture and torture, is the result of the crushing anxiety that he is dealing with. Every decision that Theon makes from that point on is determined by his constant anxiety, ending with him becoming Reek. I would go as far as to say that when Theon is turned into Reek, he becomes an actual embodiment of anxiety. The way Reek acts, From the constant quivering whenever Ramsay is in the room, to him being unable to leave Yara when she comes to rescue him, depicts what anxiety feels like to a person. I can't think of a better portrayal of anxiety than Reek. Alfie Allen's performance shows the constant fear that comes with anxiety, as well as the physical strain that it puts on you. Looking at Reek as a depiction of anxiety shows us the true tragedy of Theon's character, and makes it much easier to identify with him. After Theon endures his time as Reek, we finally get his redemption arc. This is where Season 8 comes in, and honestly, I believe Theon was given the best arc conclusion in the whole show. Looking back to Season 5, Theon saves Sansa, marking the beginning of his journey to redemption, which would later be completed in Season 8. Throughout the journey, he begins to realize that he can be both a Stark and a Greyjoy. Seeing Theon go through torture and all the hardships over obsessing on being a true Greyjoy adds so much when we finally see him start on the path to embody the Starks and the Greyjoys as one. Then, after saving Sansa, Theon goes back to his sister Yara and yields the Salt Throne to her. This shows us that Theon has come to an understanding of who he is. This later pays off in Season 8, when he finally has the courage to stand up for his sister and save her when he couldn't before. Not only does this parallel Yara's attempt to save him from Ramsay 4 seasons earlier, but the success of the mission shows us that he has turned into a competent soldier as well. But what was the main development Theon had in Season 8, and why did I like it so much? He saved his sister, creating that parallel, but what else did they get right? Well, the most important thing left for Theon's character progression in the final season was to be reaffirmed as a Stark and a Greyjoy. At the end of Season 7, we see Jon tell Theon he is both a Stark and a Greyjoy.
You don't need to choose. You're a Greyjoy. And you're a Stark.
However, there is still doubt about if that is truly the case, until Season 8. At the beginning of the season, he saves Yara from Euron and shows that he is capable of being a strong Ironborn leader. Even though we didn't get to see Theon fight Euron, we finally got to see him using his bow again. Then Theon goes north to help with the fight against the dead. Theon gets a touching reunion with Dany and especially Sansa. Seeing him be embraced and more sure of himself is another example of the strides he has made as a character. Then Theon fights for Bran in the Godswood. The Godswood was the perfect place to have Theon protecting Bran thematically. In Season 1, Theon is using his bow to save Bran from Wildwings, but this act of kindness wouldn't last. In Season 2, Theon faked killing Bran and Rickon to try and show that he was a true Greyjoy. To have him be here at the end, protecting Bran, confirms to the audience that Theon wants to make the right choice and correct the mistakes he made in the past. And in the end, Theon would die in the most sacred place for the Starks, showing us that he is a Stark. Before Theon dies at the hands of the Night King, Bran thanks him for everything he did.
Theon. You're a good man. Thank you.
In the Godswood, he then dies as a hero, like he said he would when he first captured Winterfell in Season 2. He dies as both a Stark and a Greyjoy. Without Season 8's further progression of Theon's arc, you could easily see how he might fall into the same mistakes that he made in the past. Out of all the things Season 8 didn't give us, I'm so happy that it did fulfill Theon's arc. Theon is someone who never knew who he was. He was constantly trying to make the right choice and constantly making the wrong one. From suffering through torture and embodying what can only be the physical representation of anxiety, Theon constantly changes in a story where no one is completely good or bad, and he still stands out because of his heartbreaking decisions and thematic weight. For someone like me, who first watched Game of Thrones right before I went to college, and struggled with knowing who I was and who I wanted to be, Theon was such an important character for me to watch. To see Theon grow up and embrace who he truly is, and understand the mistakes he has made, is inspiring for anyone watching. No matter what Season 8 got wrong, there is no doubt in my mind that Theon Greyjoy was given the best ending in the show, and solidifying himself as one of my favorite characters of all time.